So what I wanted to do is just tell you a little bit about my story, kind of how my companies came to be, talk a little bit about what we've done that I think is visionary and different in our particular space, and then talk a little bit as I now begin to reach the latter portion of my career, if not the beginning of the end almost, talk a little bit about what I'm hoping to leave as a legacy at our company, and hopefully even in a bigger way than just within our company. And then we'll have some time for questions. If you're not just exhausted from the day, we can do that as well at the end. And so tell you a little bit more about me. Rick mentioned two of our children. We have three, and I think some of you know two of them anyway. Our oldest daughter, Ashlyn, graduated from ACU in May of 2017 and promptly headed off to Europe to hang out, work, play, have a great time. She ended up deciding to come home for Christmas, and on her way home, stopped in Washington, D.C., interviewed, and got a job. And so she is not headed back to Europe, which I'm excited about because I have lots of reasons to be in D.C. and very few reasons to be in Dublin, Ireland. And so, whoops. Should I go to the handheld? Or? Okay. All right, I wasn't very good with that Britney Spears thing anyway. That was awkward at best. See if I can unload this out of my pocket. All right, is that one on? Okay, there we go. So our son Luke's a sophomore, and some of you perhaps know him. And then our youngest daughter insists that she will not go to ACU, but I've heard that before, so I'm not going to hold out yet. She is a junior in high school at Highland Park High School, and she's a ton of fun, and that's our family. Mark and I have been married for almost 27 years, coming up on 27 years, and so it has been a great ride. And, of course, both of us attended ACU, and my story starts there. I was an accounting major at ACU, finished in 1989, way back in the dark ages. Got a job at Price Waterhouse and proceeded to go to Houston and work for Price Waterhouse. And being in the Houston market, that afforded lots of opportunities to work in banking and oil and gas. And about a year and a half or 2 years into my work there, Mark and I got engaged, married, and I moved up to Dallas. And when I arrived in Dallas, they didn't have very many oil and gas clients, practically none, as a matter of fact. And so I kind of got thrown into the general pool of different audit areas, kind of hadn't found my home. And when we got through the first busy season at Price Waterhouse, and if you know much about public accounting, kind of from January to late March, early April is not much fun. You're working a lot of hours on the weekends, and it's a pretty busy time. And as newlyweds, that particularly didn't really fit what we were expecting our lives to look like, to go 3 or 4 months with hardly seeing each other. And so I decided, well, it was time to go find a job. And frankly, I was looking for just that. Wasn't looking for a career. Certainly wasn't looking for something that I ultimately have become called to, but I was absolutely just looking for a job, one that I could work at for a year, 2 years, that we could save a little money and remodel a house that we had just purchased and hopefully then begin a family. And my grand plan, my calling, I was confident, was to be a stay-at-home mom. That's what my mom had been. That's what I'd always wanted to be. And I thought life was lining up just perfectly for that to be the case. And so when busy season ended, I went on a search. And it turned out it was a good time in the economy in Dallas. And so within just a couple of weeks, I had 4 job offers. 3 of those offers made a lot of sense. They were either companies that I had done the audit work for, or they were at least in industries that I had some experience. But one of the offers didn't make any sense at all. It was to become the controller in charge of the accounting function for a home health care company. I had never worked in the healthcare space while I was at Price Waterhouse. I didn't know the first thing about home health care. And to boot, back in those days, home health care was what we call cost reimbursed. What that means is that every year, Medicare would set this limit. And they would say, well, as long as you spend less, let's just say $100 per visit, as long as you spend less than $100 per visit providing care to the elderly, we'll pay you whatever you spend. But if you spend over $100, that's going to be the cap. So it was a business that you could kind of treat more like a nonprofit. You could lose money, but you couldn't make money. And so here I go, stumbling into this opportunity. And when I assessed the 4 things, I remember thinking, well, even if I'm only going to work for a year or 2, it's always better to be in charge than not in charge. And this was the only one where I was going to be in charge of the accounting department. I was young and naive, and I hadn't asked very many questions. When I arrived for my first day of employment, I found that I was in charge of myself and one other person. And so it wasn't much to be in charge of. But nevertheless, I arrived, and I took it on with the full gusto, trying to learn what this business was all about. Well, my first job was to do these things called the cost reports. It's basically the financial statements, and it would determine whether or not you were above or below these limits that I just mentioned. So this particular company had 4 Medicare provider numbers. So I was putting together these 4 cost reports. And I put together the first one. I read the manual. I figured out how you did it. I put together the first cost report, and just like it was supposed to be, it came in under the caps, like 10% below. And the second one and the third one, similarly, were sort of in that 8 to 10% below level. And then I got to the 4th provider number. I went to put in the data into the spreadsheet. I'm going to admit how old I am because it was Lotus 123 back then, not even Excel yet. And I began to realize that this 4th provider number was way over the cost limits. Well, being a good accountant, I thought, well, I'll figure out what the problem's going to be. It's early in the year. We have all the way till December 31st before we have to officially be under these limits. I'll do the budgets and I'll see how it's going to come out. Well, lo and behold, I budget the rest of the year, and guess what? It actually got worse before it got better. And it was going to lose even more money because this company had a big corporate overhead, and they had decided long before the year ever started that they would allocate the overhead based on a proportion of revenue. So as this new small 4th provider number got started, it had just started earlier that year, every time it grew, it took on this big allocation of overhead. So for every dollar of revenue, it kept getting incremental cost. And so there was just not enough time or enough potential growth to get out from under those limits. So I went to the owner and I said, listen, I know I'm new and I may have done this wrong, but I think I have it right and you have a problem. Lo and behold, we validated the numbers and the facts, and there was a problem. And I said, what do you want to do about that? And he said, well, let's sell it. So I began my second task as the controller. I began to talk to people who might be interested in buying this provider number. I called over to Price Waterhouse. I had been smart enough on my last day of employment there with my box of goodies from my desk in hand to stick my head in the office of the healthcare partner. And so sure enough, about 3 weeks later, I call him and I said, hey, Woody, do you remember me? I met you on my last day of employment. I need help already. Who do you know that would buy a home health agency? He was gracious enough to make introductions, and I started having conversations with people. And I found out at this point in time I was not very good at sales, because as I tried to get people to buy a business that was losing money and to pay money to do so, I could not seem to overcome those hurdles. And so everyone kept looking at me and just saying, no, I don't really think we're all that interested in that. And so after about a dozen rejections, I went to have a meeting with the owner, give him an update on my progress, and I started describing my activity. And those of you who know me, I had an opportunity to play golf with Jack down in Cabo earlier this week. I am super competitive. I just really hate to lose at anything, golf in particular, but I really hate to lose at just about anything. As I'm describing what I've done, I start to think in the back of my mind, this feels a lot like failure. It's my first real assignment, and I'm having to admit I can't get it done. And so I say this, well, what if I just buy it? And he says, sold. And I said, wait, I didn't mean buy. I can't buy it. I don't have any money. I just kind of meant I'd take it. And again, he said, sold. And I said, well, maybe can I sleep on it and talk to my new husband about it? So I'm driving home from work that night, and I'm thinking, I got to have a better sales pitch than I've had to these other dozen people. Mark is never going to go for this. And so I bust into the back door. I start with buttering him up. I say, honey, good news. We're going to buy a home health agency. He says, with what? And I say, well, that's the better news. They're just going to give it to us. And he said, well, why would they do that? And I began to tell the story. And he sat patiently and listened as I unfolded my grand plan. And after he kind of sat there for a while, he said, with his first really honest question, what do you know about Homecare? And I said, oh, I don't know anything about it, but it just doesn't seem that hard. And with those auspicious words, I returned the next day to work and told the owner that I would, in fact, buy or take, as the case may be, this failing home health agency that was losing money and had, at that point in time, 7 months left in the year to get under those cost caps. Well, you see, when I bought it, I didn't have a big corporate engine. So if I could make those growth plans that I had laid out in the budget work, and I wouldn't have to accept his big corporate overhead allocation, then I might actually be able to buy this for nothing and get it for free. If I failed to realize the limits, then however far I went over the limits, that's what I would have paid for it. So the first thing I knew was nothing about home care, but I knew I didn't have any money. I knew I was broke. And so losing money was a really bad outcome. And so the first thing I did was I came and I laid off all the back office staff. I laid off the administrator and the hiring manager and the HR person and the payroll clerk, and I laid off all the back office staff save one. Kept the billing clerk because I knew I needed to collect cash. I knew I needed to not go to jail doing it since we mostly billed Medicare. So I kept the billing clerk, laid off everybody else in the back office. So one day, knowing that growth is our number one objective, I go out making sales calls. So how many of you have done an elevator pitch? Anybody done the elevator pitch? So I've got a great elevator pitch, at least I think so. The first 2 or 3 minutes, I'm carrying it off pretty good. It sounds like I know what I'm talking about. But lo and behold, this day, this particular physician starts peppering me with questions. Well, it didn't take very long of peppering before he became really obvious that I didn't know the first thing about home health care. He quickly dismissed me from his office, and I walked out and I thought, I got to change my strategy. This is never going to work. I need more than an elevator pitch to be able to sell this business. And so I began to go back to the office, and I began to schedule for the next 2 weeks ride-alongs. Home health care is really a business with nurses and physical therapists, home health aides, and when patients come out of the hospital, but they need incremental care to really get fully back to their full rehab potential, our staff will go into their home and actually provide that care. So I start calling our field staff members, and I say, can I just ride with you? Would you just teach me what does a physical therapist actually do in the home for our patients? What are some of these nursing diagnoses that we actually deliver? And let me see what our home health aides do to help patients with activities of daily living. And so I scheduled 2 weeks worth of ride-alongs, having no idea that those 2 weeks would change my life. You see, in the first couple of days, I walked in very sheepishly, very timidly, kind of stood in the back of the room and watched as the clinicians interacted with our patients. And what I discovered was that the work that we do is really amazing. Most of the patients that we were serving, particularly in this agency that I became associated with, were over on the east side of Fort Worth. And if any of you know Fort Worth, that's a poor side of town. They were poor neighborhoods in homes that oftentimes weren't particularly safe, that had rodents and safety hazards throughout. They were in neighborhoods that were treacherous at best, and they were with patients who often lived alone. And I watched as our nurses came in, and our patient would hug their neck, tell them how much they'd missed them, and thank them for being there. And then as our nurse would teach them about how they might need to adapt their behaviors or change their diet or be aware of particular signs and symptoms that would indicate their disease process was getting worse or possibly going to send them back to the ER. And for several days, I stood back timidly and watched. But I can honestly say those first several days changed me. All of a sudden, I came home one day and I said, this is amazing. I can't believe this could actually be my job. Because this feels like the kind of thing you do for service. This kind of feels like a mission trip. This feels like something that these patients have this desperate need. And ultimately, this could be my job. This could be my vocation. This could be the place where I could live. And then a few more days went by, and as I began to get more comfortable and come in a little closer and interact with the patients and talk more to the staff members, we would go from home to home because we take care of patients in their homes, and so we would have time to drive in between the houses. And I began to ask our clinical staff, tell me about you. Where did you come from? What's your background? And after a few days with a few different people, I came to realize that everybody's story sounded a lot the same. It sounded something like, I became a nurse because I love people. I knew from the time I was young I wanted to be in the caregiving profession. So I went to nursing school, or I became a physical therapist. And then I went to work in the hospital. And 12-hour shift after 12-hour shift after 12-hour shift, I finally just felt so empty, so burned out, like I had lost all of my passion. So I left there, and I went to the nursing home. And gosh, that was even worse. And now I'm here, and I'm just hoping it won't be awful. And I remember going home to Mark and saying, you know, I just might could do this. Because I don't even think we have to be good. We just have to not be awful. If we can just be not awful, I think really great people are looking for a not awful place to work. And if we could go further than being not awful, if we could actually be a good place to work, gosh, we could attract the very best clinicians who have really just been used up and treated like a commodity by the system. I could attract those great people, and I've just spent the last 2 weeks watching them. If I could actually get them in the door and treat them right and give them the right tools and the right resources and the right benefit structures and tell them thank you and tell them I appreciate them and tell them somebody noticed all the great things they did, well, I think great people would come to work for us. And if great people came to work for us, they'd give great care. And if they gave great care, I'd have stories to tell. And the next time I go encounter that doctor and he wants to know what we do with a patient who has congestive heart failure, I'll be able to say, well, let me tell you what we did for Miss Smith. And I'll have a story to tell about how we've been able to make an impact. And so I thought, this is going to be easy. All I've got to do is create a great work environment. Well, it wasn't quite that easy, but in many ways it was. At the end of the day, 25 years, almost 26 years later now, I look back at all that's happened in our company, and I'm pretty confident that the only thing we really did well was create a great workplace. And once we did that, everything else took care of itself. We began to grow, and as we grew, we got under those cost caps, and I didn't end up losing any money that first year, thank goodness. I'm pretty sure my life story would look different had I ended up in the overcaps position that first year, because we didn't have any money to fund that. But thankfully, we ended up below, and the company began to grow. And we got to the second year, and a lot of my peers in the industry began to say, okay, well, now you're past that challenge. Your objective should be to spend $99 of every 100 that Medicare will give you. And I said, well, spend it on what? We're giving great care. We're giving great benefits. Our people like working here. The patients are getting what they need. As an accountant, I just couldn't get my arms wrapped around the idea of just wasting money because it was theoretically there to waste. And so I said, no, we're just going to keep being efficient. We're going to give people what they need. We're going to give the care they need. We're going to create a great employment environment. We're going to do it efficiently. And so we were a very unique company in the home care space. We operated 25% below the cost caps. About 5 years later, we had grown to $35 million in revenue. And we were operating at that below cost cap space, about $8 million below the caps at that point in time. And a public company came along and they said, gosh, we heard you operate below the cost caps. Nobody does that in home care. Is that really true? And I said, well, yes, that is true. We're about $8 million below the caps. And they said, great, we'll pay you 5 times that amount to buy your company because we're a for-profit company. We've got all this overhead. We could fill it into that capacity, get that $8 million from Medicare, and that'll make our for-profit business $8 million more profitable so we can buy that as bottom line. Well, that sounded like a pretty good deal to me. I was 29 years old, and somebody just offered me $40 million for a company that I didn't think could ever even make money. I thought, okay, I'll take that deal, and I didn't ask very many questions. And that's where I proved to make a pretty big mistake, because as it turned out, that company wasn't a very good company. Yes, they gave me $20 million in cash and $20 million in stock of their company, but within 11 months, I'd been fired as the regional vice president over the Southwest because we didn't see eye to eye. They didn't believe in treating people right. They didn't believe in treating patients right even. They just tried to always do the least you could do to get by. And so we butted heads all the time. So I actually got fired on the day Luke was born on December 9th of 1997. Now, what kind of company fires somebody while you're giving birth? I mean, literally in the same day, I got a fax. So that company tells you a little bit about how they felt about people. But as it turned out, they ended up being pretty bad actors because in addition to getting fired, the good news for me was I wasn't there when about 6 months later the FBI came in and raided that company and sent both the CEO and the CFO ultimately to jail for Medicare fraud for doing some pretty bad things, far worse than what I had seen in my time there. And so that wasn't a very good experience. But my phone started ringing as soon as that happened, because when it did, all my employees immediately found themselves without a job, or my former employees. And so folks started calling me, and they said, hey, is there any way we can get the band back together? I mean, it used to be a lot more fun when you were here. Can we do that? And I said, well, let me check with the lawyers and see what we can figure out. So we did, and sure enough, the lawyer said, yep, they're out of business. You can get back in business. And so I began to buy home health agencies, and I began to put back together the company that these guys had sort of gutted and crumbled into nothing. And I began to build what is today Encompass Home Health and Hospice. Encompass is now the 4th largest Medicare-certified home care company in the nation. We have 240 offices spread around 29 states, and we've grown to be a leader in the home care and hospice industry. And along the way, we've done it all just on that same foundation, that foundation of just treat people right. Rick mentioned earlier our mission statement. Our mission statement is a better way to care. It doesn't sound like much, but I can honestly say that it has transformed our company. The most frequent thing I hear from patients is that I've had home care before, but this experience was just different. It was better. Your nurses, they always called. They always showed up on time. They always made sure that if they were going to be late because another patient had a crisis, that I was aware of that. They make sure that when they're there, they treat not only the immediate issue, but that they look around for other things that might be needed. Your company is just different. And the most frequent compliment that I hear from our employees is that I'm a better nurse here than I've been anywhere in my career. And what we found is that by simply waking up every day and saying, how can we deliver a better way to care for our team? Give them the tools, the training, the resources, the acknowledgement, the appreciation, the recognition that they need. If I can give them a better way to care, well, then they'll just naturally go give that same experience to the patients. And it'll stand out, and it'll be distinctive. And when the patient experiences that, they can't wait to tell someone. They don't just tell me in the form of the compliments they send in, but they tell their doctor. When their doctor hears over and over from patients who had Encompass, wow, this was an amazing experience, that makes it easier when our sales team walks in the door. They want to actually send more business our way because our care has a high level of quality, a distinctiveness to it, and then that helps us grow. And when we can grow our top line, that gives us the opportunity to create a financially successful business and to grow this last year into a company with $750 million of revenue and $130 million of EBITDA as we've been able to grow and yet honor that simple mission. Well, along the way, I mentioned one of the things that we needed to do was provide our people with the tools and the technology that they needed. And so in 2001, we began developing a software because we didn't find a software on the market that we thought would help our nurses do their jobs more effectively, have all the clinical data and information they needed to make good decisions, to be aware of the patient's history of vital signs and what had been happening and what they should do as a clinical best practice. And so we couldn't find a solution like that, and so we began to develop it on our own. And that company started in 2001. It's called Homecare Homebase, and I also serve as the CEO of that. Homecare Homebase is now the leading technology provider for all of the home care and hospice industry. 9 out of the 10 largest home care companies in the nation use our technology platform to run their business. 7 out of the 10 largest hospice companies in the nation use our platform to run their business. And 28% of all the nation's home care and hospice volume is processed through the platform that we built. And so we've been able to provide not only great tools that help our clinical team get better, but we've been able to build a successful second business and create tools that help our whole industry perform at a different level. And so that's kind of my story of how my career has evolved. It's not a natural common path, but it's one that has resulted in some amazing successes and some amazing opportunities. And when I look back on those successes, there is one thing that I know for certain, and that is that it absolutely just can't be about me. I was 25 years old. I didn't know the first thing about home health care when I entered this space. There's just no reasoning or no logic behind why someone like me was able to build something like Encompass and Homecare Homebase. The only thing that makes sense to me is that God blessed us, that He gave us a little bit, and we were faithful with it. We treated people right. We did the right thing. We honored Him in all of our successes. And so He said, I think I'll give you a little more. Let's see how you do. And again, we were faithful. And a little more, and a little more, and a little more. And I don't know where the ceiling is. I don't know what God has in mind for me. I promise you that 25 years ago, if you had told me it was this, I would have said, oh, not me. Not us. We don't know enough to possibly become that. And yet God has continued to provide resources, tools, people who are smart, who know our industry, who love people, who embrace our mission. And along the way, we've been able to create a platform for a company who I hope our legacy will be that we're a company that was wildly successful. I mean, successful beyond imagination. But not just successful, but successful because we intentionally chose to be godly in the workplace. We chose every day to honor what we read in scriptures. to love our neighbor as ourselves, to treat others as we want to be treated, to always do the right thing, even in the hardest of circumstances. And by bringing those biblical principles into the workplace, not only have we made people better nurses and better therapists than they've been anywhere else before, but we've helped our employees reconnect with their faith. We don't try to be a company that converts or evangelizes people to our particular way of believing from a religious perspective, but we absolutely try to be a team that evangelizes to a better way to care. And we believe that everything about that mission absolutely aligns with biblical principles. That there's not a thing I can find in scriptures that doesn't align with our mission as an organization. And so that natural synergy that's been able to be created between being faithful in the workplace, using the blessings that God has given us to take a platform and make it bigger and make an impact now on 10,000 employees, that's the legacy that I want Encompass to have. And most of all, I don't just want Encompass to have that. I want other companies to look around and say, wow, how did they do that? It doesn't make any sense that they had that kind of success. And when they really start to look and peel the onion and see how we did it, that they'll say, well, they did it by being intentionally godly in the workplace. Maybe I want to do that. Maybe I can do that in my widget business. Maybe I can do that in my manufacturing business. It doesn't just have to be in the space of healthcare. Making that choice to be godly, my hope is that people will see our unimaginable success and see it not as a reflection upon us, but as a reflection upon the principles that got us here. And that they too will choose those godly principles as they look to their life. A question I'm asked pretty often is, gosh, how do you balance it all? You're CEO of 2 different companies. Their combined market cap is over $3 billion. You got 3 kids at home, a 27-year marriage. You're chairman of the board at ACU. How do you do all those things? How do you keep all of that balance? And I want to tell you that I think this may be the most valuable part of what I can offer tonight is a lesson that I learned early on. When I was younger in my career, I used to think that it was really about keeping all these priorities at opposing ends. Anybody have one of those teeter-totters in their playground yard that had 4 prongs on it? And you'd put a kid on each of those 4 prongs, and boy, it was hard to find balance on that teeter-totter. And the longer you stood away from each other, the harder that balance was to seek. And when I was young in my career, I used to think about balance just that way. Well, I've got my faith over here, and I've got my family, and I've got my work, and then I've got my community, the things that I want to do in my community to make an impact. And they're all pulling at me from a priority perspective. And every now and then, I would find balance. Except I'd look around, and I'd realize that the only reason I found balance is because I was really mediocre at everything. I might be balanced, but I wasn't really doing an outstanding job at work. I wasn't really knocking the cover off the ball with my family. I wasn't doing all I could be doing for the Lord. I really wasn't doing much. I was just kind of working in the cafeteria at school. I wasn't really helping my community that much. I was kind of balanced. Everything was getting a little bit of attention, but nothing was very good. And I looked around and I thought there has to be a better way to do this. And what I discovered is just like that teeter-totter in the playground, that is you could bring those things closer together. That the closer I could put all 4 of those elements, then the greater sense of balance I could have. Instead of it becoming this teeter-totter with really long opposing arms, instead it felt like a swivel. Where at any given moment, one part of your life might get more attention than another because of the crisis of the moment or the demands of the moment, but that everything was always close to the center. And as I began to draw my life together, what I found was a sense of peace that I hadn't had before, a sense of purpose that I hadn't had before. And so I began to look at, boy, how do I do that? How do I bring those things together? And so first, I looked at my calendar and I realized the most waking hours that I was spending anywhere was being spent at work. So the first place that I needed to go to create balance was at work. And so all of a sudden, I started thinking about ways that I could bring my faith into the workplace. And so we started being more intentional. We didn't start out talking about being godly in the workplace, but we grew to be a company that talked about that was intentional about our faith in the workplace. And over the years, people have said, this company drew me back to the Lord. I had lost my faith. I had no interest in faith. I felt like faith was just a farce that was being pitched out in the world. And then I came to this company and I saw what real faith in action could look like. And now my family is back at church. The divorce that I was considering, we went to counseling instead and became part of a family. Those are all real stories that happened because we began to bring our faith closer to our work. And then I thought about, okay, how am I going to keep my kids from feeling like they're not as important as they should be as I spend all these hours away from them? And so I started bringing home stories. As they were little, they were stories about patience. Here's Miss Smith, somebody's grandmother. Here's what we did for her today. And I started making sure that the kids understood that, yes, I was gone, but it was for a purpose that mattered. It was for an impact that we could make in the community. As they got older, I began to transform those stories. Instead of just being stories of patience, I began to tell stories of the business, the challenges that we were facing. What could they learn from me as a business person that could help them in their own life to pursue their passion, to know how to deal with challenging situations, whether it's business or whether it's life. At the end of the day, every challenging situation comes to how you deal with people. And the people are always at the heart of that. And so what could I do as a mother to use my work as a platform to teach them how to be better people, how to deal with crisis more effectively? And I found that as I did that, I didn't feel so guilty about the hours that I spent away from them. Instead, I started using the hours that I was with them to help them see how the work I was doing mattered and how it could benefit not only the people that I was working with, but how it could benefit our family. And then I began to look to our community. And as I did that, I thought, gosh, we have all these clinical people, nurses and therapists, and all these people with tons of skills, but most of them are struggling to some extent financially. They're making ends meet, but they don't have a lot of discretionary income, and the challenges that they're facing don't provide them opportunities to take those great skills they have and go do mission work. What if we could start a foundation that would actually provide them financial assistance, that would give them time off from work, so if they want to go to Honduras, or if they want to go to Haiti, or if they want to go to Guatemala or Africa or China or India and do mission work, that our organization could help them do that. And so we started a nonprofit foundation called Encompass Cares. And to this is our 10th year in operation. We've cumulatively given out over $3 million in grants to support our employees who've gone on international mission trips. Just this last year in September, we were able to support 50 employees who went down and worked with Dr. David Vanderpool at Live Beyond in Haiti. We're able to work as a team with him in the medical clinic there and in the food distribution center and in the schools to help in that organization. And so our company is making an impact on our local communities as we do community outreach programs, on the world as we support mission trips, and then as we help one another through Encompass Cares. When we have employees who, like we did in September, experience devastating losses from things like Hurricane Harvey, we paid out $75,000 in grants to employees that had lost their homes, their cars, all of their possessions in those storms, as well as in Hurricane Irma that hit our Florida region. And so we've been able to draw those four things together. And my encouragement to you, particularly to the females in the room, is don't give up on the belief that there is a work-life balance. But I got to tell you that it may be different than you think. It's not about how do I work a little so I can be a mom a little, so that I can be a Christian a little, so that I can help my community a little. That's not really balance. Figure out how you can bring those things together, how you can find work that lets you bring all of those elements to bear at one time. And those are some of the things that I hope to be able to share with you. The last thing I'll say, because I already went a little bit long and we'll have time for some questions, is just a few lessons that I wanted to share with you, if I can find my notes here, of some things that I think over time have been really beneficial in my career. And the first one that I would say is to find your passion. I wasn't looking for my passion when I stumbled into home health care. I was just looking for a job, not a career, and certainly not a calling. But I found that top of the pyramid experience. And when you can find that thing that you can say, boy, this is what I know I'm called to do. For me, it was kind of obvious because I wasn't looking for it. And when I felt that tug, it was clear that that was something I was meant to do. It wasn't my own will, but clearly something else that was pushing me there. But look for that thing that you can find purpose in. Look for that thing that you can say, I love going to work every day. Because when you work from a sense of calling and inspiration, life's just better. Work's better. There's more excitement. There's more enjoyment. And the day isn't drudgery. I don't ever find myself looking down and going, oh no, it's only 3 o'clock. To the contrary, the day flies by because I'm doing work that I'm passionate about, that matters, that I believe in. The next thing I would say is don't be afraid to take a chance. Boy, at 25, it was a risk to jump into owning a business that I had been in for 58 days, that I didn't know anything about, to taking on the risk that we could lose a ton of money we didn't have. That was a risky proposition. But don't just say, boy, God opened that door, I need to go through it. God gave us a brain. He gave us intellect. He gave us knowledge and experience, and he expects us to use them. And yes, there are times when he's going to open a door for us, but he still expects you to discern, I believe, whether that door is the right one for you to go through. Weigh the options, weigh the risks, consider the alternatives, and go in with not only a passion, a belief that this is where God is leading you, but go in with an intellectual belief that I can do this. I have this capacity. I know that there's something here that I'm being called to do, and balance those things and take that risk, but do it in a thoughtful, intelligent manner. The third thing I would say is bring life to the center. As we talked about with balance, bring all the things that matter to you as close to one another as you can get them. When you do that, that's where that sense of balance will happen. And then the last thing I would say is give back. We've been so blessed financially, so much more than I could have ever hoped or imagined for. Toys that I never even dreamed of having that I now have. But I'm going to tell you that the best day that I've ever had is the day that we announced the gift to ACU. That was a far better day than the day I got the car I had been dreaming about, or even our home in Cabo that I love. But that day was a better day. And so find those things as God blesses you. Find those things that you can give back to, because those will be your best days. Those will be the days you want to remember. Those will be the days that you'll want to have again, that you'll want to say, you know what, that's a day worth experiencing again. And it's not that the toys are not fun. If you know me, you know I have far too many toys. And so I'm not trying to be disingenuous about it. And I don't know if it's right or wrong. I certainly don't know if it's scriptural. But for me, I found peace in my blessings by kind of keeping a ledger. It says, as long as I always give away a whole lot more than I spend on stuff and toys, then I feel balanced about that. That may not be right. That may not be scriptural. That may not be the guidance that's right for you in your life. But I'm just saying, for me, making sure that giving back is more important than buying and spending on ourselves or our family. That's been, for us, the greatest blessing. And I think because of that, God just keeps giving us blessings, ones we can't understand, because I think he knows where our heart is. And I think he knows that our heart is in finding those things we're passionate about, whether it's ACU, whether it's Live Beyond, whether it's Mission Lazarus, whether it's Eastern European missions, whether it's Children's Works of Dallas, whether it's Camp Summit, all charities that we have become passionate about, that we love being a part of. Find those things when God blesses you, and don't wait till he blesses you infinitely. Don't think that the only people who can have the joy of giving are those who have extreme wealth. Become a giver early in your life. And I think you will find that when you give, you will receive so much more.